Alright, so we're ready to take our SVG and actually convert it into a three-dimensional shape within Blender. So this here is the project that we're going to work with. I'm not sure how this is going to load up for people who don't have Dropbox. You may be required to download Dropbox in order to access the file. I've had students do this before in the past and they didn't have any issue with downloading it. Anyways, I'm going to download the file. And it's just going to go to my downloads directory, which I can definitely access by just choosing the little arrow here and show in folder. And I can see that it's in my downloads directory. So noting where this file is important so that you can obviously access it and import it into Blender. Alright, so the next step I'm going to do is actually import Blender, or sorry, load up Blender itself. So I'm going to type in Blender here, and it's the Blender app, which you should have installed. If you haven't installed it, I definitely recommend doing that now. So you can pause the video, install Blender. And I've reset my Blender because I do use my Blender, like I have features and stuff that I set up in my Blender that I like as a scene, but I have reset it so it should look exactly the same as your Blender, and there should be no difference between yours and mine. When you first boot up Blender, which you will already know because you've watched the navigation video, so you know how to navigate your scene, you're going to see all these different pieces inside here. You'll see your lamp, your little cube, your default cube they call it, and your camera. That's what this little thing is over here. What I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to press A on my keyboard. When I press A, it selects all the items in the scene, and then I'm going to press delete, and then all the items will delete. We will bring a camera back in and we will add some lighting, but we're going to add lighting in a bit of a different way, which will seem more natural. We're going to use something called an Hdri, but we'll do that in a minute. And we will add a camera into the scene, and I'll show you how to be able to use that camera so that you can focus right on your actual item within how you want it to be displayed. So the next thing is we want to import the actual SVG so that we can convert it into a three-dimensional object. So if I go to File up here, Import, you'll see there's a whole bunch of import options in here. We just need to select the import option that's relevant to us, which is this one here, Scalable Graphics SVG. Sorry, we have a lot of kids and they're all playing outside and then they all decided to come in at the same time. Let me go through that again. We're going to go to File, Import, and Scalable Vector Graphics, this one here. Don't choose the grease pencil one or it will make it very difficult for you to be able to follow along with the tutorial. So Scalable Vector Graphics, if you click that, it's going to open up your File Explorer. This File Explorer is a bit challenging to work with, but hopefully you have these quick shortcuts over to the left. I'm not sure how this looks on Mac. I haven't used Blender for Mac in a really, really long time, but hopefully you can navigate to wherever your file went to. I'm going to go to my downloads directory. I'm going to find my file, which is called motherdemo.svg, and I'm going to click Import SVG. Now you're going to automatically assume it didn't work because when you look at your scene, you're not going to be able to see it. It's going to be super, super small. But if you look over here to the right, this is almost like the layers panel in Illustrator or in any of the applications you're working with. These are all the different pieces of my actual project. It's there, it's just very, very small. If I scroll up, I can see it. There it is. So I can tilt my viewport by clicking down and holding my middle mouse button, which allows me to tilt the viewport so I can tilt it into view. I can also press 7 on my keyboard, which will actually take the camera and position it right directly above it, and then I can see it directly head on. If I want to pan this, I just hold down the Shift key, use my middle mouse button, and then I can pan. If you forget to hold down the Shift key, you will wind up tilting, right? So right now, if I click on this, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the dimensions are of this particular item. If I want to be able to see the dimensions, you can see a tiny little like arrow here. If I click it, the arrow will bring out this box. The top item here, where it says item, are all the different transformation properties of our actual object. So it tells us the dimensions as well. So right now you can see my dimensions are 0.0813 meters. When I did the file, I did it in inches. It's actually set to 4 inches wide by 4 inches tall. The information of your project is something you're definitely going to want to know, just the overall dimensions of your project. You don't need to know each individual piece, just the overall dimensions. So there's a couple of steps I want to do here. I don't want to work in meters, I want to work in inches. So what I can do is I can click on this icon here that shows like a cone and a sphere and a dot. If I click on that, that's my scene properties. And in my scene properties, there's an option here called units. If I click on units, I can change from the metric system to the imperial system. And then under here where it says length, I can change from feet to inches. And now this is set to inches, and as you can see, it says it's 3.2 inches. Like I said though, my file is actually 4 inches, so there's a discrepancy between the two dimensions. So how do I fix that? And you definitely want to. And one of the reasons why you want to is because when you go to thicken it, you're going to want to thicken it to the thickness of your material. That's the whole point, right? So that you can figure out placement, make sure things fit properly, that kind of stuff. So we definitely want to take our SVG and make it the correct dimensions. Right now our SVG has no thickness. If you look at it, it's just 2-dimensional, right? But it does have a width, that's the x-axis, this red line here, and a height, which is the y-axis here. The thickness will be the z-axis, which is up and down. All right, so how can we go ahead and resize this so it actually fits? Well, we need to do a tiny little bit of math. Not very much, just a little bit. I'm going to open up my calculator and bring it over here, and all I have to do is take the dimensions of what my project should be, so 4, and then divide it by the dimensions of what it is currently. So right now I'm working with a square object, so I only need to do 1 calculation. If you weren't dealing with a square object, you would have to do 2 calculations. So I'm going to divide this by 3.2, and the difference is 1.25. That's the difference of my calculations. Actually, you shouldn't have to do 2 calculations. You should only have to do 1 and then change the scale. So I know that I need to scale this up by 1.25. So how do I do that? Well, all I have to do is select my shape, and you might be keen to click in here and actually do the adjustments, but the problem is if you do that, you'll see that it only affects the top selected shape, which is not what you want. To change that, you can hit Control Z. Instead, what we need to do is actually use the shortcut keys for scaling it, as that will actually affect the whole selected group. So I've selected my whole group by drawing a box around it. That selects the whole group. Then I'm going to press S on my keyboard, and now you can see I can scale, right? I can scale it with my mouse like so. But I want to do it accurately, so what I'm going to do is type in 1.25 on my keyboard and hit Enter. And now that is set at 4 inches. So that's important. I'll just go through that step one more time. Right now it's 3.2 inches. Make sure your units are set to inches, or this makes it very difficult if it was in meters. You'd have to do the math based on that. So I've got it set to 3.2 inches. I've done my calculation by taking the size I want my project to be, and I'm dividing it by the size that it wound up being inside Blender, which is 3.2. And that gives me the difference that I need to be able to scale by, which is 1.25. So I'm going to hit S on my keyboard, which is the shortcut key for scaling, right? And then to precisely scale it by 1.25, I'm just going to type in 1.25 on my keyboard and hit Enter. And now my shape is the correct size. So when we load scalable vectors in, they wound up actually loading in as curves. That's what this little green symbol means. These are all curves. And curves are probably, I would say they're 1-to-1 to what you get into Illustrator. One of the issues with curves, though, is that they're mathematically calculated. We can't thicken, well, we can thicken the curve, but we're going to wind up with some anomalies, and we don't want those anomalies to occur. So we need to convert our curves to meshes, which are what a model is actually. The problem is that I can't convert these to meshes and maintain that nice curve that you see there, because it will no longer be mathematically calculated. The resolution which is how we actually refer to how crisp and clean our model looks, the resolution will change and it will actually become blocky. And you'll wind up with this series of like straight edges to go around this curve. We can adjust the resolution of that curve by clicking on the curve we want to affect. So right now I'm on my border. Clicking on this little curve icon that you see down here in our toolbar. And then right here where it says resolution preview, I'm going to click on here and I'm going to type in 64, which just makes it a much smoother curve coming around the edges, and therefore a higher resolution when I go to convert it to my mesh. Now, unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way to do these all at the same time, but you don't necessarily want to. If I click on this one, you can see this selects the engraved text that I want to be able to do. If I press 7 on my keyboard and zoom in, you can see here's my engraved text. I want to be able to keep the resolution for this as well. If I change this to 64 though, you'll notice that my L has disappeared. It winds up with some oddities happening. So you might have to play with this until you get a good resolution. 36 is probably good for the height that we're going to be at, and then this should convert properly. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to do the next one. The next one I'm going to do at 64 as well, which should be fine. This one here I can probably do at 64 without it causing any issues. And then the last one I'll do at 64. Be careful how high you increase this. Blender's functional capability is dependent on your computer's capabilities. If you have a dedicated graphics card, you're in a better scenario than if you don't. Okay, my computer is very beefy. I'm a software developer, so I use a very beefy computer in order to do my day job. So just be careful. Some of these numbers, you don't want to get too high. Don't start jacking these up to 1,000 because you will have problems. All right, so I've got all of these in place. Now I can actually select them all. Go to Object, go to Convert, and go to Mesh. And if you did that correctly, the little curve icon now turns into these little triangles with these little squares. Those squares being known as vertices. Now I'm ready to actually start thickening my project. So I'm going to just put this on its side, like so. I'm going to select the top curve here, and you'll notice that right now this is very dark, and the reason is that when we import our SVG, there's like a default shader or material applied to it, and that's what's providing that color. If I want to get rid of that default material so it's not so dark, I can click on this little orb that you see here. You make sure you have your curve selected, then click on this orb, and then in here where it shows the material, you can click the minus icon, and then that will remove it. And now you can see that it lightens up. So you want to do that for each one of these. Unfortunately, you can't do them all at once. I just click on one and then hit minus, click on one, hit minus, click on one, hit minus. And now it's a lot easier to see what's going on. It would also be easier to navigate these if they had names. It's too bad the names don't actually carry over from Illustrator, even though I have named each of the layers. So we can name them though. You can actually see and get an idea of what is selected because it shows up orange. So if I double click this, I can type in background. And don't worry about the order of these. There is no actual layers in Blender, right? Because you're moving things in 3D space. So that's the engrave, so I'll just call that phrase. This is the border, so I'll call that border. This is the mother in there, so I will just call that mother. And then this one's the little heart icon, and I'll call that heart. There. So we have all of our shapes actually named. Now it's a little bit easier to work with. So if I click on the background layer, we'll start with thickening it first. If you don't want to see the other layers so that they're kind of in your way, you can click this little eyeball icon, and now you can only see the one layer. It makes it a little easier to work with. So there's a couple of things we need to do in order to make sure that this actually thickens properly. One, we need to move into edit mode. Right now we're in object mode, which allows us to place things in the scene at different locations. Edit mode allows us to modify the actual mesh itself. To enter into edit mode, you can either come up here to where it says object mode and choose edit mode, or you can use the shortcut key Tab on your keyboard, and that will move you into edit mode. There's 3 initial states of edit mode, like 3 selection capabilities. One is by vertice, which is these little dots. And like I said before, those dots represent a node in Illustrator. So these are called vertices. There's edges. So if you click on the little edge icon up here, you can choose an edge. It's not actually showing up very well. There, you can see that one. And there's faces. Faces are the literal block pieces that are making up the actual image. Right now we have a whole bunch of these little things, and what will happen is as we thicken or if we bevel or we do any things with them, we can wind up with some anomalies occurring where the mesh actually seems to distort. So a good way to kind of clean it up and get rid of that problem is if we press A on our keyboard to select all of the faces, or you can draw a big block around it to select all of the faces. We can do something called cleanup under this mesh. So if I go to mesh, cleanup, limited dissolve, all those little lines disappear and our mesh looks nice and clean. Okay. Like I was saying about the squares, if you zoom in, you can kind of see those edges are a little bit straight in spots. So that's just a thing to note. The higher resolution, the less those edges will be straight. But we're not going to see it, you know, that close where you're really going to notice it. While I still have this selected, if you happen to deselect, not a big deal. You should be able to just select it by clicking on the face now. While I have it selected, I want to extrude it. So the options to extrude, there is an option here called Extrude Region. That would do what we wanted to do. Or I can press E on my keyboard, and now I can move it up and down. The thing is, I want to come down, but you'll notice as I come down that it cuts in. So what I do instead is I right-click, and then that gives me the extrude region and move, but I haven't actually changed the dimensions here in any way. So I'm going to open this little box, and you'll notice that there's nothing set yet. And on the Z-axis, I'm going to set this to 3 millimeters, which is actually 0.125 inches. And as you can see, it's now thick. But what I've done here, it's moved upwards. I actually wanted to move down below this x-axis here. So I'm going to move it down. So I'm going to do negative. It's acting kind of bizarre. For some reason, I'm not filling in this face. This face is not filling in properly. I'm not sure why that's happening. But we can fill in the face quite easily if we choose our edge selection here and we hold down our Alt key and click on one of these edges. It will select all the faces, and then I can hit Shift and click any of the ones that are currently not being selected. This is painful. That's weird. I'm not sure why it didn't just automatically close them. Hold on. I'm just going to Control Z until I get back to this point. And I think, oh, I see why. It was when I hit the surface, it missed selecting some other things. You have to press A. If you press A, then it will select the whole face. My apologies. Now I'm going to press E, and all I'm going to do is hit Enter on my keyboard, and then I'm going to type in negative 0.125. There, that worked. Now it's thick like it's supposed to be, and it looks like it's going in the right direction. I guess we'll find out in a minute. But both sides are capped. Nice. All right, I'm going to press Tab to exit out of object mode, or you can come up here and just choose object mode. That's your other option. Sorry, out of edit mode, back into object mode. And I'm going to re-enable my border. So now I can see that I have a border selected, but it's currently at the bottom, and I can't actually see it. All right, so we're going to do the same thing with the border. So I can turn off the background. Now the other thing is too, is I know my border, my heart, and my mother objects, all 3 of these are going to be on the same layer and have the same thickness. So if I want to be able to do all 3 of these at once, I can select all 3, and then I can press Control J on my keyboard, and then that will join them. So I selected all three of them. Just to do that again, I selected all three of them, and I press Control J on my keyboard, and then that will join all of them. By the way, whenever I say Control, if you're on a Mac, it's likely Command. That's the equivalence. So now that these are all selected, I can tab into edit mode. I can select all the faces. Just make sure you've got face selection turned on here. And I've pressed A and I've selected all my faces. Step 1 is to go to Mesh, Cleanup, Limited Dissolve. That will remove all of the extra lines and stuff that were on the thing. Then I'm going to press E to extrude and hit Enter immediately. And then that will bring up this little editor. And I'm going to type in 0.125, and then that will create my thickness for me. Now that I'm done, I can press Tab and I can exit out. If I re-enable my background, you can see that we've got a problem where the background and the mother is on the same line and they're intersecting each other. If I want to bring the background down so that it's under mother, I need to move it on my axis. So if I click on the background here and I want to move it down below, I can press G and Z, and that will allow me to do that. So G is move. So right now I move all over 3D space, but I want to lock it to an axis. To lock it to an axis, I press Z. That locks it to the Z axis. And now I can bring it down below the other object. But you know, matching this up perfectly is going to be super difficult. A way that we can do that to make it easier is we can enable this snap option. If I click on the little magnet, from this drop down I choose edge. Now if I press G and Z again, I can snap it. See, it snaps to that spot. So now we can see that that's three-dimensional. So now introducing the phrase is going to be a little trickier. What we have to do with the phrase is we have to select it, we have to thicken it, and then we have to cut it using a boolean operation into the background. So our first step is the same as what we've done for the other ones. I'm going to select it, I'm going to press Tab, I'm going to make sure I'm on face selection here, and press A to select it. So I've got all of this selected here, as you can see. I'm going to go to Mesh, Clean Up, Limited Dissolve to remove any garbage that's in the shape, right? I'm going to press E and Enter, and I'm going to set the Z axis to 0.125. And there we go. You can see we have that shape. Now it's obviously not cutting in, right? So I'm going to press Tab to go back into object mode. And then what I want to do is I just want to move it down so that it cuts into the actual shape itself, into the background. So there's a few steps here to make that nice and simple. I'm going to press 1 on my keyboard so I get a side view here. And then I'm going to enable wireframes. So these are rendering options to how you actually view your scene. Wireframe makes it so that you can see through the object. Makes it nice and easy to see through the object. Then I'm going to press G and Z again, so I'm constraining, and I'm moving along the Z axis. If you find it snapping and it's annoying and it's irritating you, you can always just click the magnet and then that will stop doing that. So right now I'm cutting into the object quite deep. It's up to you how deep you want the engrave to appear. But keep in mind this layer that's below this middle line you see here is the layer that will wind up cutting in. So now I'm just going to tilt it back so I can see again what's going on. I'm going to re-enable this shaded view so that I can see this. All right, so we've got our three-dimensional border, we have our three-dimensional heart shape, we have our mother shape, and we have our background. Now I want to take this and cut it into the actual background itself. In order to do that, to extract that shape, I select the parent of the thing that I want to extract from. So I'm going to take the background itself, and then I'm going to cut out the friend part. So I'm going to go to my modifiers over here on the right. I'm going to click Add Modifier and choose Boolean as my option. So now I have all these different options: intersect, union, or difference. Union actually combines the two pieces together. Intersect will only take the spot where the two pieces meet and leave you with that difference. Difference is basically subtraction. So you can think of it like Illustrator using like weld, subtract, divide, those type of things. It's the same kind of principle. There's a few different ways I can select this. Either I can select the little eyedropper and click it, or if I click on this little block, I can just find the thing that I want to extract. So phrase is the thing I want to extract, and then it will perform the calculation for me. Now, this is the thing that's kind of a gotcha for people who just entering into Blender. You'll notice that this is still perforated text. The reason is that the effect has happened to the background, and the original shape is still sitting on top of that background. If we want to make it so that we can see the cut-in, we have to actually hide that. So if you see, if I hide it, now you can see that it's cut in. Don't delete it though, because you can actually still take this and cut in deeper if you wanted to, or raise it. So that allows you to be able to choose the depth of your actual extrude. So this is kind of cool. You can kind of see what's happening here, but you know, we don't have any colors. It's not really attractive in any way. Why don't we actually colorize our project? So if I select on the border, I think I might go for a red border, and then a nice wood grain for the background, and then have the heart and mother be white. Now you'll notice right now all three of these are a part of the same shape. If I change their shader and change their styles, it's actually going to affect all three. If I want to separate these, I can do that quite easily by going back into tab mode, click one of these faces and press L, or maybe it's Alt L. Control L? Oh, Control L, that's what it is. So I just select each one of these, Control L. I think I can actually do all of them at once if I just select all of them, like so, and hit Control L. There we go. And then once that's done, I can press P on my keyboard and choose Selection. And then that turns it into its own object. So I'll do that for the heart as well. I'm going to select the heart. I'm going to hit Control L. That selects all the vertices that attach to that heart. And then I'm going to press P and choose Selection. And now those are their own objects again. And then I'm going to press Tab to come out. So now I've got my border, and I've got this thing called border 1, which is actually mother. And then I've got border 2, which is actually the heart. Now there are three objects, and I can add three different materials to those objects. There are ways to do where you can add materials in edit mode. You could do that selection and then add the material to those particular groups, but it gets a lot more challenging. So I'm going to take my border. Yeah, I'm going to take my border, and I'm going to add in the color here. So I'm going to choose my material, and I'm going to choose new. And this is quite confusing. There's a lot of different options here. I do recommend watching the Blender Guru on shaders and go through his stuff on shaders. But what we're going to do right now is very simple. Right here where it says base color, I'm just going to click this white, and I'm going to choose a nice color. So I'm going to come down to red, like so. And I might make it a bit darker. There. And then you're going to notice that it doesn't show up. And the reason is that right now we're in like a preview mode. If we want to be able to see our red border, we have to actually select this option right here that says Viewport Shading. And now you can see the red outline. All right, so for the background, I want to make it look like wood, except for we're not going to go through that whole process of doing textures. I recommend watching, again, the Blender Guru on how to do textures. Instead, we're just going to make it a simple color that kind of looks like wood. So I'm going to take this into, I mean, a lot of us use birch ply, right? Is that birch ply looking? I can't tell if that's birch ply looking. Maybe we need more orange. There we go. That's kind of birch ply looking. So there we go. We have a red border. We have our birch ply background. I'm now ready to do mother, so I will select again the material, choose new, and like I said, I'm going to make it white. Right now it's white, but it's not very bright white, so I'm going to bring it up and make it bright. And I want to do the same color for the heart, but in order to do that, I can quite easily just choose this drop down here and select that material. You can also name your materials. Right now this is called material 003. I can call this white paint, like so. I can select the red one and I can call it red paint. And then I can select the background and I could call it Baltic birch. Now they have names, so when you select them from the drop down, they're actually named and you know what's what. All right, so we have this whole scene. However, if we want to render it like I did in my photo, it's not going to render very well. If I click on this particular thing here that says Viewport Shading, you're going to see it's too dark. And the reason is we have no lights inside our scene, so it's not rendering very nicely. In order for it to render nicely, we need to be able to add in some lighting. And you can just add lights into the scene, but the way I do it is using HDRIs. HDRIs light the scene for you. They make it super simple to light, not much of a challenge. Yeah, just super easy. So what I'll do is I'll give you a link here for a free HDRI. I think Polyhaven is probably the one that most people like. So this is a public location. You just scroll down to where it says HDRIs and click Browse HDRIs. And then the one I like to use is the studio ones, and I think they're further down here. Yeah, here it is. So this is a small studio. This is the Small Studio 8. This is the one that I used for the image that I put up onto Facebook. So if you want it, you just click on it and then choose download. And then that's going to download an EXR for you, which is the HDRI format. So once you've downloaded that, we just need to change our scene lighting. So the way we can do that is you'll see this little world icon. It looks a bit like the material icon. If you click on the world icon, though, there's all these different options, and they are kind of confusing. The only one we care about is where it says color here. We're going to click this little yellow block, and it's going to pop out this window, and we want to choose environment texture. And it's going to go pink, like just a big horrible pink color. Anyway, so we're going to click open. We're going to navigate to our downloads folder where that EXR is. I'm going to select that Studio Small 08 EXR, and I'm going to choose to open the image. And once I do that, you're going to notice everything looks kind of a little bit more styled now. It does look extremely cartoony. And part of that has to do with how we're doing the rendering. Blender has multiple render engines. Rendering is how it interprets light in the scene, how it interprets the surface of the mesh, the edges of the mesh. All that information determines how that is going to look once it actually runs through the rendering engine. In order to fix what we're seeing right now, we can actually change the rendering engine from what we're using by clicking this little, it looks like a back of a digital SLR camera, and change this from Render Engine Eevee to Cycles. And you'll notice it immediately seems to get way better looking. If you have a graphics card inside your computer, you can change this from device CPU to GPU. And it should be faster for you, like considerably faster for you. So right now my scene is it's like a little fuzzy, right? But that's fine. Don't worry about that. You don't need it to be rendering quickly. I'm just zooming out a little bit. Everything in the background, if you scroll around, like you can kind of see all the lighting and stuff. It literally wraps the whole scene with that studio lighting, which is kind of cool. What we want to do, though, is create a plane underneath this so it kind of reflects off the plane and adds some better shadows. So if we press Shift-A on our keyboard and go to the Mesh option, you'll see plane at the top here. Just click on plane, and then that will drop a plane in our scene. But what you're going to notice is the plane has now replaced our background, because what's happening is our background is actually under the plane. So we need to either move the plane down so it's locked in place with the background, or move our whole object up. I think it's probably easier if we just move our plane down. So why don't we keep the plane selected, press 1 on your keyboard to change the view to a side profile, re-enable your snapping, and then press G and Z and bring the plane down so it snaps at the bottom here. And I'm just going to rotate. And there we are. That's a nice view. This little line that you're seeing in here is likely an error in the mesh. We can go ahead and take care of that in a few seconds. Let's finish up our scene and then we'll deal with that one issue. So in order for us to render this, we need a camera, and rendering is where we want to get to, right? So this is nice, this looks pretty, you can probably screenshot this, but you're going to have all these weird noise all over the place, and it doesn't look very attractive. So we want to render this so we get the highest quality image out of it. The way we can do that is by adding in a camera, and just like we did with the plane, if we press Shift A, underneath here is an option to add a camera, and we can click on that to add our camera. Now you're probably wondering, where did the camera go? The camera has moved off screen. So if we want to see the camera, and this is going to be interesting, you can click this little button here, but if you have a numpad on your keyboard, it makes life even easier because the numpad will allow you to be able to move around quite easily to see where the camera's view is. But if we click on the camera here, we can see that we're not seeing very much. What I like to do with my cameras, once I have them and I've got it selected, I've clicked on the camera view, and I'm in this scene, I like to zero out all of these rotations. So I just click on them and press 0, press 0, press 0. There we go. So now it's all zeroed out. If I change my view slightly by rotating, I can see where my camera is in the view. And we can see that the camera is currently sitting underneath our plane. And also you'll notice too, it's got this cone shape, right? So I'm going to press G and Z and bring the camera way up above. So it's like that. So it's like focused above it. And then I'm going to press on my little camera view again and see what I see. Cool. Now I can see it. Now how can I align it so it looks better and I see it full? So as long as my camera is selected, I can click on this tool option, this view option here, and then I can actually choose this option to lock to the camera view. So now as I scroll, it's the camera view that's locking in place. And as long as my object is in between these borders here, I can work with it. So I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to move my object into the middle of the scene here, zoom in a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it. And you might have to pan and tilt quite a bit to get the camera where you want it to be. And yes, incidentally, there are easier ways to do this. I would definitely recommend watching videos on how to navigate your camera. And there we go. Now I can see my mother's shape, and I've got my camera, and it's in my view. I need to move it over just a little bit. There we go. So now I'm ready to render. So how do I render it? I can go to the render option up here and choose to render image, or I can just hit F12 on my keyboard. So I'm going to click render image, and then it's going to run passes. So what it's doing actually is it's taking a look at the light in the scene, and it's projecting the light against the shape, and then figuring out where the shadows are going to land and where the light is going to reflect from. Just like real life, just like natural real life things. This sample group right now is doing 4,096 samples. This is defined right here under the render where it says max samples. The more samples, the better these calculations are, okay? But the longer it will take. I have a very good GPU, that's a graphics card. So this actually goes fairly quickly for me. If you don't have a graphics card and you're operating on your CPU, or I don't know, maybe you just have a lower end machine, you may want to scale these max samples way down so that this occurs fast enough. Like right now, if I look at this, I would say this is production ready and I could accept that, and I'm only at 1,600 samples. I'm pretty sure I could lower this to 512 and it would still look pretty good. Yeah, this is way overkill at this point. That black line is terrible, eh? So likely what's happening there is we have a gap in the mesh where that's not covered. And we have to fix that gap. There we go, the samples are almost finished. It's got like 16 samples to go. And it's finished. So to save this, you can go to Image, Save As, and then it's going to save it as a PNG, but you do have other options here. You can save as a JPEG, you can save as another EXR, you can save as a whole bunch of different options. I just save it as a PNG usually, right? And just give it a name down here, and then click Save As Image, and then that saves the image. And then I pull that into Photoshop or an image editor, and I, modify the, like some of the settings, like the exposure, just like I would if I was to take a picture. So how can I fix this particular edge issue? If I go into my view, working like this is painful because it's difficult to work when everything is so slow and it renders so slowly. So I'm going to move back into my original view here so everything is much faster and renders quicker. I'm going to unclick this, make sure my camera is selected, and unclick this lock. So now I can move my stuff around. You'll notice that the scene kind of moves around the thing that's selected. So if I select my mother background, for example, now the scene is still kind of moving around the camera. I can fix that by pressing the dot on my numpad, and then that will allow me to be able to now focus the orientation around that particular object and not all over the place. So if I do that, and then I can click on my heart here and hit tab, and now I can edit the issues that are in this. So if I look at it, yeah, sure enough, you see how this is kind of like a bright white? It's because this is no longer being filled in for whatever reason. So we can correct that. To correct that, we just need to select the edge at the top here. Oh, weird. That edge is really bad. The edge at the top and the edge at the bottom. Yeah, this mesh has a lot of problems. So why don't we fix it the quicker way? If we choose A, we can go to Mesh, Cleanup, and we can fill holes. It doesn't seem to want to fill that hole at all. Maybe we have loose geometry. Oh, that did nothing. These cleanup options are kind of like little pieces of godsends to make things better. I don't know if that's doing anything. Nope. It might be a normals issue. Let's try merging by distance. Sometimes that helps fix things up. Oh, it didn't remove any vertices. Oh, too close. Too close. What if we do 0.05? Not bad. 0.04 might be better. Yeah. It's just a little too close. That's the problem there. That's not bad. Still looks like a heart. Not that difficult. We could try 2.5 as well, or even 2. There we go. That's nice. That's nice and clean. So what that merge distance does is it basically takes the vertices, and when the vertices are close enough, it just merges them together and welds them together. So that hole is now gone. If we want to see our render, it still takes place where that camera is. If we press 0 on our keyboard, on our numpad, we can see our camera view. Okay, or again, like we can click the camera, that also works. Right? And then we can go ahead and do that render again. So I'm actually going to cancel that and change this to 512 passes instead of 4,096 passes. And then I'll do the render. There we go. It's at 80, 112 of 512 passes. really you're trying to get rid of this noise. You can see the noise in the scene. You could remove it in Photoshop as well, so if you do have quite a bit of noise, you could always pull it into Photoshop or whatever editor you're using, GIMP or whatever it is, and then just remove it with the like a denoiser function that's in those. I also sometimes put denoise on. You can enable that function underneath render, and it should do it for you. It is a drain on your CPU, just to warn you ahead of time. And there we go. That's it. So now I have my 3D image. I'm happy with that. Now I can go ahead and start looking at, the Blender Guru's shading options and learn how to shade this even better and make it more realistic. Those are all options. But hopefully this gets you guys started. Yeah. Anyways, thanks. Bye.